Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Blair, editor of Retail TouchPoints today, and today I'm very happy to have Brendan Witcher, who is Principal Analyst for Digital Business Strategy at Forrester, join me for this Retail Reset conversation. Our goal with these is to provide a curated virtual forum for retail executives to map their post-coronavirus recovery strategies, and today we'll be digging into some of the ways COVID-19 is reshaping retailers' approach to personalization. Brendan, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with Retail TouchPoints. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here, Adam. It's nice to see you again. Glad you're well, and it's nice to see a familiar face. I haven't seen too many of them.
Ditto, absolutely. So let's dive right in. Personalization has been a buzzword in retail for many years now, even if it's more of a goal than a concrete achievement, a goal to be striven toward. But what would you say have been some of the key impacts of COVID-19 on retailers' personalization efforts?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, personalization always starts with a good understanding of the customer. And I saw a joke out there on the internet recently that something about that COVID-19 has thrown all the AI solutions into whack because you're dealing with history, you're dealing with understanding. We've added a whole new element to consumers that we didn't have to worry about before. That was fear, concern. Just basic understanding. Sentiment has become a really important component of this situation now. So personalization in this timeline, what do you need to focus on? A lot of companies, unfortunately, forget that probably half the country disagrees with them on the way they see things. Remember, I happen to be in the camp where I haven't left the house. I've only left the house 5 times in 3 months, right?
Wow.
I'm that guy. But I know plenty of people who have this is no big deal. I'm going out. Everyone's over-exaggerating it. So I see a lot of companies even making the mistake of assuming when they put out there, now is a time of uncertainty and we're there for you. To me, that comes across great. But to other people, that might not come across so great. You're just feeding the engine. And so it's very, very difficult to have one message, just like it was in the past when it came to age and gender and zip code for personalization, to understand the way consumers feel about things right now. It's challenging, and it's really
absolutely
an exclamation point on the need of just how very little we understand the customer and how much we need to in order to really do personalization.
Interesting, and I like what you said about this is throwing all the historical models essentially into the trash until we get more of a sense of where things are going. Let me ask you, and you bring up a good point that consumer sentiment is very split. We just ran a story today about that essentially half the country is saying, yes, it's time to reopen, and the other half is like, no, we need more time to do that. And it's almost like a 49% split.
Right.
But we can hopefully say that community and collective action are paramount values. Does that mean personalization in the sense of the individual's rights maybe needs to take a back seat, or would you say this crisis calls for a different type or approach to personalization?
Well, I think that I've always said and always stated that consumers should determine for themselves what personalization look like. And unfortunately, most brands and retailers really haven't created the input devices for consumers to make that choice. We rely on click data and third-party data that we get. Well, that's really not what the consumer has said. For example, when it comes to me, I like shopping on the weekends. I like buying outfits together. Shirt and pants together is what I mean by that. I like using comparison charts. I like looking at 1-star reviews to see what the problem is with the product before I buy it. Right? These are what make me me. This is what defines Brendan Witcher. Right? And unfortunately, a lot of companies haven't really created ways of learning or collecting that data in order to personalize an experience for consumers. And so in this day and age, I would continue the story that I've been saying even before the pandemic is ask yourself a question: where have we really allowed the customer to share information about themselves? And have we gotten permission from the customer? Now, remember something, 80%, and I know that sounds like a weird for an analyst to say our numbers are never that round, but actually came up to 80% of consumers said, I'm willing to share at least some kind of information to get a more personalized experience. And so don't be afraid of reaching out to customers as long as you're communicating the value you're willing to deliver to them. The mistakes I see people making is they say, hey, what is your body type? Why do you need to know that, right? Like, if you need to know my body type for a reason that's going to create value for me, then say that up front. That's kind of the the golden rule of personalization that I've been touting for years, which is be overt when collecting data, be covert in delivering personalization. So even in this timeline, be really obvious about the value, like Stitch Fix does. Stitch Fix is very obvious about the value you'll get if you share all this information, and it's a lot of information with Stitch Fix in order to get that experience from them. But then after you have the information, it's not necessarily constantly remind them of who they are or what you know about them. Just deliver the great experience, and that to me is key, and it holds true prior to this, during this, and we'll say even after this.
Yeah, that's I know that's been a statement of yours, and one I definitely agree with. Absolutely. This is obviously a time of disruption for retail as well as all other industries and consumers and governments, et cetera. Do you think retailers can use, or brands can use, personalization tools or concepts in their communication efforts, either with their own people, with consumers, with people in their ecosystem or the suppliers, and what might that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, because businesses are complex, and a lot of people look for the obvious, or what people like to call low-hanging fruit, for delivering personalization. And to me, low-hanging fruit usually means things that aren't going to have that big of an impact in the first place. It's the easy stuff to do that people barely even notice. Sometimes it's better to do the hard work or the expensive work that's really going to move the needle, both for external consumers or internal employees, or even, as you mentioned, suppliers, distributors, whoever you have contact with. Think about their lives. I mean, the key to personalization is to have a level of empathy within it, right? And a lot of companies are like, oh, he's getting all Tony Robbins on us. But really, it's true. Like, if you can start to think about what is it that this person's probably experiencing right now, how can I benefit them? Then you're going to be a better partner. I've been saying this whole time that as we come out of the pandemic, you will be judged by the actions you took during it. And I know it's really easy to work about and worry about your own situation right now. Like, what is it, if you're an executive, you're so concerned about your top line or your bottom line, right? But you've got workers that are seriously concerned about, do I buy, food for my kids, or do I pay the rent? Right? Do I go into work? Am I going to be safe? And I see a lot of people saying, well, we're going to put policies in place to protect people. People aren't concerned about your policies. They're concerned about, will people follow those policies? That's what they're concerned about. What are you going to do to monitor that, to make sure that those things are being guided and followed? So for internal purposes, like, personalization means understanding the real concerns of your people at all levels of your organization, the real concerns of your suppliers, who are probably getting hit with the same sort of requests and same sort of information from hundreds of people that they send products to. And at the end of the day, also your consumers, right? And knowing what is it that they're really concerned about. It's not necessarily, am I concerned about going to store? I don't know anyone that literally I've talked to, whether personally or professionally, that said, I'm really stressing because I can't go into a store. That's not really what they're saying. What they're saying is, I'm stressing because I don't know if it's safe to go into a store, right? I don't know if it's safe, and I've got the internet, and I can buy things from there. So why should I even bother to go into a store, right? Like, that's something that a lot of people who, we talked about historical data, historical models. It's unfortunate we don't have data from 1918 Spanish flu, right? Like, that would have been great to use for our AI, right? We don't have it, right? Nobody has, as far as I know.
Well, if there's a pandemic in 2120, maybe they'll look back, but who knows? Who knows what things will even be like then? We don't know what it'll be like tomorrow, much less 100 years from now.
That's exactly right. And so, what are you learning about your customer now that matters so much? What are they really telling you, and how do you address those needs? I think things like curbside and same day delivery are really good ways of right now meeting that customer need. Even if you open your doors, it's not time to encourage customers to come to the store. It's time to remind customers that they can, but also that they have these other options. One of the cleverest things that I've seen done is people launching virtual agents on the website. Because remember, a lot of people come into stores because they have doubts about the product. They want to touch it, they want to feel it, they want to ask a store associate about it. They have questions about the product, which is why they're actually coming into the store, right? They're not getting the information they need on a website. So what people are doing are launching virtual agents on websites to test whether or not that gives consumers enough comfort that they don't have to come into the store. Now, you may say, wow, Brendan, I thought that was about personalization. You're talking about virtual agents. This is personalization, because personalization means creating relevant, value-added experiences. Anybody who joined this podcast and thought, we're going to talk about product recommendations today, that is not the definition of personalization anymore. The definition of personalization is creating, as I said, relevant, value-added experiences. That opens the aperture quite a bit to what you can do to provide value for your customers. And that's what they're going to remember as we come through this pandemic.
In addition to the IVAs, and that's great, I hadn't heard that before, but that totally makes sense. Are there other retailers or brands that you think are doing a good job of using personalization tools or techniques during this time? And what are some examples that you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen, I'm under NDA with everyone on the planet, as you know, Adam, so I can't really reveal. I don't even know what I can and can't reveal anymore. It's so hard to keep track of the news flow these days. But I would say that what customers companies that are doing that I'm aware of, is they're really shifting their mindset. And I really like that they're doing this, is they're starting to say, let's not try to predict next best behavior. That's what typically people bring in when they talk about personalization, is next best step. Forget that for a minute. The best thing to do at this time is just to go off of what you know about the customer. If someone uses curbside, there is nothing wrong with sending at least one weekly email to them that just reminds them you have curbside, right? Talk to them about what you know about them and about what they've shared with you, not necessarily explicitly, but more through their actions on what they're comfortable doing. And reminding them that is a way of creating value. I know everyone's trying to raise top line revenue, bottom line margin, because everyone's scared about not hitting their numbers at the end of the year. But just remember, at the end of the day, you'll get the business because you make the customer feel comfortable, not because you push the latest rug or lamp or battery or banana on them.
Got it. Overall, what are the ways you think that COVID-19 has shifted the terms of the relationship between retailers and their customers? And I know that's a very broad question, because obviously different retailers have different relationships with their customers, or even different relationships with different parts of their customer base. But if you have any sort of like big picture thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, well, I've got some really bad news for retailers and brands. And it's this. If you think that your customer hasn't forgotten about you, you're wrong, unfortunately. This is the great sort of resetting of the consumer mindset. What people are going to do coming out of this is say, okay, I haven't shopped for a sweater in 3 months. Now that I'm going to go back in the market, who's available to buy sweaters from? I mean, there's so many people filing for bankruptcy, I may have to change my consideration set, right? But not only that, like saying, well, who served me best? Did I get a sweater from somebody that worked out really well, ordering from them online? Maybe I should go visit their store instead of the typical store that I've gone to. And retailers know this. Smart retailers know that coming out of this is going to be the where consumers are going to say, if never before in the history of our country have we been at a point where more consumers are going to ask, who should I be getting my coffee from? Who should I be getting my services from? Who should I getting my products from? And this is where a lot of companies are going to take, and I've seen and I've heard and I've talked to retailers about this. A lot of them are shifting their investments out of the tech they were going to buy this year and more into marketing dollars to win that customer as they're getting more comfortable making more purchases, as they start getting their jobs back. I mean, don't forget, like COVID was one thing. We had a pandemic crisis, and we now have a financial crisis.
Right.
They're not the same thing. Our financial crisis will last longer than the pandemic crisis, right? And so people, just like we did in the recession, people had jobs, but they were still hesitant to start spending again so fast, right? So the event will end before the actual feelings of that event. And so the key is, as people are coming out of this and they're starting to look to spend money again, how are you getting in front of the customer and saying, hey, don't forget about us. Look, I know you're resetting. Think about us now, because that other company really didn't talk to you too much during this time frame. So I think that's key.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned that earlier, how many people are trying out or doing more of their shopping online, and that's been a shift that's certainly been sort of on a slow boil before the pandemic, and seems to have gotten a real push now. I mean, are there really significant elements of this that you've seen over the past few months? And let me combine this with my next question. Which retailers or retail verticals do you think are best positioned to take advantage of this? What will they need to do to build on these gains? You already identified some of these, but any other thoughts on how retailers may be able to take this digital attention and turn it into something more long-lasting potentially?
Yeah, it's more by I think what this has done, the situation's done. Every challenge is a blessing, right? And it's an old entrepreneurial saying, right? Every challenge is a blessing, meaning you're learning and you're growing with everything that happens to you. And I don't mean to sound cold when I say this, but I'm gonna quote Warren Buffett when he says, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And so my statement would be this: is that you've probably learned a lot of things you don't do very well during this pandemic, whether it's supply chain, whether it's commerce, whether it's associate, communications, whatever it is. My advice to everybody is look at your warts and realize just because we may get out of this pandemic now does not mean it won't come back. Now, here's the scariest thing that I can think of. The scariest thing that I can think of is everybody comes out of this. They throw so many dollars into marketing and trying to win the customer back that they don't bother to spend any money on fixing the things that happen to them and cause them to break, whether that be supply chain or whatever. And for most companies, it was supply chain, at least some part of it, whether it be the curbside pickup or supply chain is always from manufacturers all the way to consumers, right?
Sure.
If you don't fix those things now, what happens, God forbid, what happens if this comes back in Q4? I mean, this was COVID light. I got to tell you, it feels like COVID heavy. This is COVID light. If this happens in Q4 and you have the same problems, forget about it. You might as well just go work for somebody else. Fill out your resumes because you're closing your doors. Like, there is no way you're going to survive this in that time frame. And so to me, the danger is that companies assume this won't come back. I'm not saying it will. And I want to be really clear as an analyst, I'm advising my clients. Right now is not the time to make a guess on one thing and put all your eggs in that basket. Right now is a time to build scenario planning, right? Scenario planning for if this, then this, right? And so what do we need to do now to be able to do this if this comes back right away, or if this comes back in October, or this comes back next January, or if it never comes back, right? Those are the things that you need to have a game plan for, not only doing, but how much of it do you have to be proactive about now that you better fix anyway? Or can you be reactive to it? And be honest with yourself. Do you think like you can fix supply chain suddenly in a week if everything goes down again? Probably not. So
probably not.
I think that to me is where the most of the danger lies, and what companies need today to kind of really reset their thinking about improving their business. Ultimately, again, remembering everything you do leads to a good or bad customer experience. If your supply chain breaks, it's a bad customer experience. I have 10 grocery order examples I can show you that were horrid. 10 of them, right? Over the course of the last 3 months. And they were all because of supply chain issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if it's a psychological issue too, of people just don't want to envision that it will get worse again or it will return. And they're therefore not doing the kind of scenario planning that you're talking about. I mean, I know personally, it's like, I just don't want to think about it. And
I get it. And I want to say what probably some people out there might be saying, yeah, Brendan, but you're an analyst. You got no skin in the game. You're absolutely right. I have no skin in the game. It is all your risk. You can do whatever you like. I'm just basically calling it out and saying, that's the advice I'm giving my clients. And quite frankly, if I was running a retailer like I did at Guitar Center, where I was head of strategy over there, or at Harry and David when I was head of marketing, these are the things I would be advising the executive team on there if I was there today.
Yeah, it's tough decisions or tough plans to make, but it's necessary. I wanted to ask you about the role of technology, whether it's either existing technologies or things that are might be coming up on the horizon. Are there things you see that could be helpful with the kinds of personalization efforts we've been talking about and that you've been talking about? I'm thinking maybe augmented reality tools or things within stores themselves, more granular customization or individualization solutions. What kinds of things do you think are going to be useful in the toolbox as we move ahead?
I'm really appreciative of you asking that question, Adam, because I'm sure that the people listening they're going to see Forrester, they're going to see Brendan Witcher, Analyst. If you know me, you know what my answer is going to be. If you don't know me, you probably think that I'm going to be like, yeah, invest in heat detecting things at your front doors and augmented reality to try on products and all this kind of stuff. I think I hinted just a moment ago that I worked in retail for a fairly long time, and I kind of know how this really works. So I'm not going to give you the advice that you get from somebody else who just gets up on stage and kind of says, the really latest, hottest buzzword. I'm going to tell you the truth. The truth of the matter is most companies, most retailers that I know, they're hurting, okay? They're hurting financially, and they just don't have the funds and the resources and the dollars to be spending on the latest flashy, innovative thing. I'm not saying never. I'm just saying right now, it's just not practical. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going against so many people out there like, you need to invest in innovation. Not right now. Not right now. Now is the time to buckle down and do good business. Be a good retailer. Get the basics right. Don't screw it up. You do not have time or the money to investing in like really way out there stuff that, no customer is going to come out of this pandemic and go, well, I'm going to continue shopping with, company A because they had augmented reality. That's not going to happen, right? What they're going to do is they're going to say like, who was there for me? Who could I place an order with? Who got the order right? Who sent me emails that were relevant to me? Who's out there really doing good things in the community? There's so many companies out there doing amazing things that I know about as an analyst. And I call them up because I know them, right? I know people at these companies. So I can call them up and say, hey, why aren't I seeing you talk about this? Right? Consumers want to know that you're doing good at this time. And that's not like to sound cheap or whatever, don't be humble, because that's what makes consumers feel good, is that we're all in this together. And the way you feel like we're all in this together is feel like everybody's pitching in. And so my advice, which I'm sure not everybody's going to say, but is invest your money in PR, invest your money in marketing, invest your money in doing good, and in doing things that are going to set you up for coming out of this, rather than the latest sort of, blockchain virtual robot driven by AI analytics, whatever. Like all that stuff, I don't know, Adam, if I can pitch my own report, if that's okay with you.
Go for it.
That I do the top retail tech report every year. I do it every year at Forrester. It's one of the top read reports, right? And I will tell you that the top investments before the pandemic were not all these flashy things, 3D printing, all that kind of stuff. It was the core. It was personalization. It was omni-channel. It was digital store transformation. And I went back to all these companies that I interviewed for this report, because it's not a survey. It's an actual interview that I do with everybody. I went back to them and I said, are you going to make these investments? They said, we're still going to make the same investments, just not now. We're going to move them out later. So that even bodes more for the point of, not only should you not make the core investments now, but more focusing on what you need to do to prepare for the next, down the road scenarios. But you should not be then going even further and investing in some wild, crazy thing that has very little proof of concept, very little use case, chatbots, all that kind of stuff, like social commerce, right? It's all great. In normal times, I'm a big fan in certain scenarios for those things. In these times, it's just not time for it.
Yeah, I can totally see that, because even if you did have that, it's hard to know how it's going to work because the times are so strange. I mean, maybe people would try an AR thing that they wouldn't before, but when things get back to normal or whatever normal is going to be, they may be like, yeah, it's a nice toy, but it doesn't really, improve my shopping experience. So
yeah. And Adam, if I could go back to my roots in retail and say that it's hard enough to get a project done in retail when you're all in the office together, right? Try to do it virtually. Try to build an AR solution virtually with everybody trying to homeschool their kids and do all this stuff, good luck. It's a lot. It's probably a waste of time. Stick to what you know for now.
Yeah. It sounds like you're also talking about emphasizing communications, PR, marketing, and all those aspects of it. And some retailers at least have strong tools already in place for that.
Totally true. You brought that up, Adam, and I think it's a really good thing to remember is you can't look at Walmart and say, look how great they're doing curbside. They've been doing curbside for a year before this, right? Like, of course they're good at it. Look at Sephora. Oh, that augmented reality tool they have is so amazing. Yeah, but they had that before this, right? So if you had it before this, great. If you're coming out of this, when we come out of this situation, you want to invest in those things, fine. But right now, probably not the time. And again, remember, fix the things that broke now so that you're not in the situation again in Q4, even before you go after those things. But again, it's easy to forget all those retailers that were doing all these great things like buy online, pick up in store and same day delivery, like Target had shipped, long before this event. And so I think it's really important to not look at others and say, look what they were able to do during the pandemic. They didn't do it during the pandemic. They just scaled the technologies they already had during the pandemic. That's a much different story than what you might be trying to do right now.
Got it. Well, my last question is kind of an open one. Are there aspects of this that you think either the business press like Retail TouchPoints or the mainstream media has not reported sufficiently? Anything where it's like you go, why aren't people talking about X? Just curious about that side of it.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a really nice question for you, especially to ask me. I really appreciate that opportunity to just kind of say whatever. But so there's a few things that I would point out. Number one is like hear everybody saying this term called the new normal. There is no way this is a new normal. Like we're not all gonna continue to not shave and bake bread at home and do webinars in our pajamas. Like that. That is not the new normal. And like Starbucks just opened their stores, a few of them last week. I thought it was really interesting that they reported that their comp sales year over year in the very first week of opening for stores was 65%. 65%, right? Already back at that. And in fact, our data shows that consumers are telling us that consumers in China said that 60% of them said, it's around 60%. I'm not memorizing the data. It's around 60%. Said that, I'm going to continue shopping the way that I am online. Whereas in the US, it's only 20%, right? So I know everybody's been circulating this big graph that's been going around from Bank of America. It's out there on social media a lot, which shows that e-commerce has jumped to 27% from 16%, right, from last year, or the beginning of the year, rather. That grocery has jumped from 3% up to 9 to 12%, depending on the chart that you're looking at. This is not the new normal, folks. This is not what's going to continue. We're going to see people move back because this is a forced behavior. This is not something that consumers have said, hey, I prefer 10 bad grocery orders and I prefer to do situations where I can't even look and touch a product before I buy it. No, this is not a preferred behavior. This is forced behavior. And when we get out of this, will we be higher in e-commerce? Of course we will. Will we be at 29%? No, we won't, right? We're probably going to trade. We're currently trending at about 3 to 5 years pull forward on the trend line of where e-commerce was heading. And we're probably about 5 to 7 years ahead of where we were trending for e-commerce grocery, for example, right? But we're not going to stay there. We're going to pull back. Probably in grocery, you'll end up somewhere around 5%, which is still a huge lift from 3%, right? But we're probably going to pull back to about 5%. And we're probably going to pull back in e-commerce to somewhere between 18 and 19%. It's not going to hover back, stay up around 30. This isn't the new normal. And I think you need to ask yourself, coming out of this, what works for us? Curbside is a good example of this, right? Where you see lots of companies saying, we should do curbside, we should do curbside. Curbside works in certain scenarios, large basket sizes, large margins. Curbside is horrible for things like grocery, where margins tend to be about 3% because you're starting to eat into that margin so quickly. So what worked for you before the pandemic and didn't work for you probably will be the same after the pandemic, and you're going to have to make some hard choices. Anybody that's out there saying you're going to be forced to do curbside after this, no, you're not. You're just not, because you shouldn't be a nonprofit and you don't always have to do things that the customer wants if it's not going to make you money, right? Because you can't, do these things until you put yourself out of business. So things like same day delivery, maybe coming out of this, people will be willing to pay for it. They weren't before, but maybe now they will. For now, they sure are, because I don't want to go to a store, so I'm willing to pay a premium. Will they coming out of this? Some customers will, some customers won't. And so it's important to be able to kind of look at that. And in the media, they're not reporting that. They're all saying it as if this is going to continue as is for the next 3 years. And that's simply not true. Come next May, if we don't have a resurgence, my guess, and you can, put this out there and everyone can hold me accountable to it. I'm guessing by next May, if we don't have a resurgence of the pandemic, I think you're not going to see any of these lines on the floor in retail stores. You're not going to see anyone wearing masks. You're not going to see these plexiglass things behind the counters, probably by next May. I say that because there's some history there. Look at 9/11. Right after 9/11, it's like, we're never going to fly again. We're all flying again, right? A week or two later. all in the air again, right? We're all flying after that. I live in Boston, right? We had the triple E virus here. It was like crazy. Soccer practices were canceling. Everything was going on. Guess what? Once triple E, once the first frost hit, I don't think I ever heard the words triple E for the next, I haven't ever heard it since, right? We get over things pretty quick as a society. And I think that once this is gone and past us, just keep in mind that we'll probably move on pretty quickly.
Got it. No, a lot of that makes sense. But as you say, there's a lot of questions still. Will there be a resurgence? How bad will it be?
All bets are off, Adam, if it comes back.
All bets are off. Absolutely. Well, Brendan, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for the insights and just your whole approach to this. Really appreciate it, and the fact that you have the retail background, I think, adds a lot to it as well. And thanks so much for watching. We really appreciate it, and everybody stay safe.
Stay safe. Take care, everyone.